So, our topic today is the economy, and more specifically, what people think about the economy. Because what people think about the economy and what the economy actually is are always going to be very different things, but it's affecting the left right now in an interesting way. Everyone has their own little bubble on the internet of what discourse they're privy to. But if you're in my bubble, you have seen a lot of discourse about, is the economy actually bad and why do people think that it is? Because by most general metrics that we usually use to judge the economy, we have very low unemployment, we have rising wages, we have a fairly fluid labor market, we have prices. As much as we had the massive inflation has fairly normalized. We are actually, all things considered, after the massive economic shocks relative to the rest of the world, America's in a pretty decent place. And trust me, I hate to give credit to Joe Biden for anything, but I do say that relative to what our metrics are supposed to be, it's a little surprising that the view of the economy and the view of Joe Biden's role in the economy is really negative. A Suffolk University Sawyer School of Business poll showed that 3 in 4 people used words that reflected worry or worse in responding to their polling. An overwhelming the 1 in 5 who said things were good or improving. So most people think things are bad, and very few people think things are good. 70% of those surveyed said the economy was getting worse, not improving. 22% said the economy was getting better, which, again, by any objective metric, really is not the case. And I know here on the left, we complain a lot about it, but just specifically looking at, jobs, employment, wages, they're all moving in the right direction, as much as they might not be where we want them to be. So here's my question for the room. Before I just said everything I had said, would you have said the economy is improving? And 2, why do you think that? And why do you think there's these disparities? Whether you think the metrics we're using are wrong, or whether you think they're right and people aren't seeing them for whatever reason. I'll throw EK. I saw a lot of nodding from you, so I'm going to throw to you first.
I was just nodding, showing you.
You're nodding like, I hope he doesn't call on me.
I've seen the videos of one person reads. I just didn't want to stare blankly at the camera. No. Okay. So, if you ask me that question, I would say it's not improving. So I'm in sort of like a weird kind of position. So I live in like the greater Seattle area. So stuff is already expensive out here. And I work in real estate. So we have a ridiculously hot real estate market. We have tons of people that have been trying to buy houses for years that keep on getting priced out of houses. And they're getting priced out by people with a ton of money and they pay in cash. Like I've had so many people not get a house because somebody outbid them by like $100,000 and their bid was all cash. So like there's that going on. And then, also me coming from the Midwest where, like $100,000 when I was a kid bought you a very nice house. And over here, you can't even find anything like that over here. You get like maybe a trailer someplace. But as far as like the economy, like in and of itself, it's like the economy is not the stock market. Like they're not the same thing. So like the numbers are not the economy that the economists are looking at. It's really people, and it kind of gets into like the stage of capitalism where we're in, where it's just showing off every single crack and every single flaw in the system, because now there's so much disparity where it's like, yes, these things that generally indicate that the economy is good are not actually being felt by a lot of the people. Like gas for me this year was ridiculous. We have a lot of taxes on our gas out here in Washington State. So for several months, I was paying over $5 a gallon, and like last year, it was like 4 something. It was like edging up to 5, but like never hit that. And before that, it was like in the threes and like edging up to four. So it's like, and that was a change that happened like almost instantly. Going to the grocery store, for example, like a few years ago, you were paying like, I don't know what, $2 for a gallon of milk. And then all of a sudden it's like three something. And even if your wage did increase, so you went from making, say, 17 an hour to now you're making 20, 22, the milk still went up, you know? So you're still paying basically the same. And just like rent, for example, has gotten extremely ridiculous for a lot of people. So it's like, if you, unless you are pretty much upper middle class at this point, it's like you're feeling that you're being squeezed somehow, even though every traditional indicator is showing, hey, the economy is actually doing what it's supposed to do. It's because we've created these large disparities to where like more people are just getting pushed out and pushed away of what those numbers are supposed to indicate. So that's my take on it.
Roy, what do you think?
So, kind of going off that same thread, I take issue with these kind of survey questions because of how broad they are. Like, what do you mean the economy is doing good? There's like 20 different areas that you can call the economy. You know, stock market, housing market, labor market. There's just so many different ways to test that. And a lot of the statistics that you were reading off, John, it's almost like they're looking at the economy through a lens of how is it how are the rates going 2 years ago compared to now. They are going up. The trend is changing in a positive direction, almost like a slow rebound. So for that, statistically, you can say, oh, the economy is improving because of those metrics. But then it's also not getting the bigger picture. It's not looking at like buying power proportional to income. It's not looking at these broader things that happen generationally. And there's I cannot remember the account's name right now, but there's a guy on Facebook that breaks down a lot of these housing market statistics, saying like the boomer generation had like 20% of their income going towards mortgages and housing, and millennials now pay like 53% on average of their income. That inflation rates and rent rates have gone up by over 200% in the past 4 years. Like, you look at these, the numbers are right there. We are in the housing market and in a lot of the labor market, we're going through a silent depression. But when you look at the rates and you look at the numbers and their trends, they're slightly positive than they were a couple years ago. So it's kind of misleading. It's like the economy is in a terrible shape, and I don't think that's Joe Biden's fault at all. Joe Biden has actually done, like you said, a pretty good job at cushioning us from just going into a full-on depression. And a lot of it is honestly not even presidential in a lot of ways. A lot of it is just the beast. It's just how it operates. And a lot of it is residual from the pandemic and all the poor policies that spawned out of that, failure to protect the employees, a skyrocketing unemployment rate because of that. So it's just a lot of stuff to try and just pack into one answer. But I would say in simple form that we are seeing a rebound, but it's not enough of a rebound to make a difference for anybody that's below upper middle class.
Yeah. If you were to ask me the question, like, is the economy improving? Do I think it's good for the American people? I would say no. And I would say that there are two main problems here. The primary problem you guys have already touched on is that when the media reports the health of the economy, they use metrics that don't necessarily correlate to a better life for your average American. And the two that they use the most are unemployment and the stock market. So the stock market could be through the roof. Like, it could be crushing it. It's Wolf of Wall Street. It's amazing. And you saw this a lot during Trump's administration, when Trump voters who lived like in a shanty somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and they're like, "Can you believe how high the stock market is?" It's like, okay, what do you care? Like, that's not affecting you at all. And they're all happy about it, and so their idea is, oh, the economy's doing great. And the other is unemployment, which also doesn't correlate into a strong economy. I mean, like, what's unemployment, like 3.6, like 3.9? I remember like 20 years ago, people were saying that like below 4%, like 4% is full employment. Like, it's impossible to get lower than that. We're actually lower than that right now. And that doesn't mean a whole lot either, because it doesn't tell you how well those jobs are paying and how well the workers are doing. Just because they're working doesn't mean that, you know, they're killing it in the outside world.
40% of homeless
I think,
people are employed.
yeah, and there's better metrics that we could use that actually mean something to us, because those numbers mean something to like economists and especially rich people. Like the stock market is just a reflection of rich people's feelings. Like how's their gambling going? And we could use a metric like what's the average percent of income someone is paying for rent? That would be an amazing indicator for the economy. That never comes up. I've never seen reports on that. And the second one is a marketing issue. And I've been meaning to like talk about this for a while, but one thing about Donald Trump is that he is a born marketer. Like the guy just like he knows exactly what to say to, you know, to pump himself up and to get his message out there. And something he did all the time was talk about the stock market numbers. Like every week he was talking about how high the stock market was, and unemployment too. Can you guys recall how many times Trump went on TV and bragged about the fact that Black unemployment was the lowest it's ever been in American history?
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
of course, we all know that, you know, if you
Depends
look
how
at
you
the
define
trajectory,
employment.
say
Yeah.
what?
It depends how you define employment.
Yeah, if you look at the trajectory of Black unemployment, like you see an actual chart, it had been on a steady decline for like 10 years. I mean, at a steady rate. And it happened to hit the bottom when Trump was in office. And so he claimed credit for it, although he had nothing to do with it. You know, it's just been declining for a long time. Now, politically, that's the smart move. Like it is a good move to do that. Like you take credit for a true fact. And Biden could learn a lot from this. I am amazed that Biden doesn't do this, because Black unemployment is actually lower now. Have you ever seen Biden on TV saying we have the lowest Black unemployment in American history? Whenever the stock market's high, Biden never goes out there and talk. Now, once again, we know that these are bullshit metrics, or are mostly bullshit because they don't affect the American populace. But if you want to write part of your job, one of your main jobs as the president of the United States, is to raise the morale of the populace. And doing stuff like that not only raises morale, but it helps you out politically. And the double-edged sword to this, though, is that while those indicators being good doesn't necessarily translate to a good life for Americans, if those indicators are bad, it does translate to being bad for Americans. Like the stock market's high, it doesn't really affect most people. The stock market crashes, you are screwed. If unemployment's low, all right, sure, you have a job paying $9 an hour. If unemployment's at 10%, everything falls apart. So like you can't win either way, but because the metrics are nonsense. But the fact that we use nonsense metrics and Biden's not even taking advantage of it, yeah, it's irresponsible. It's political malpractice.
Part of that is because liberals don't know how to sell themselves.
Yeah,
Terrible
it's
branding.
It's well, so I think what we're kind of getting at here is the disconnect between the reality of economic metrics and the reality of perception of economic metrics. And I think that, you know, one thing that I definitely am not is one of those leftists who goes, economists are bad. There's definitely a sect of the left, and I'm sorry if the people in my audience are one of these people, but that goes, economists are bad because I went to Econ 101 and they taught bullshit. And you're right, they did teach a lot of bullshit in Econ 101. That's why it's 101. And if you actually look, like the reason I support leftist policies at least, is not because I just think they theoretically are better. I look at economic data and I look and go like, oh, these are we can prove that these policies work. There's no reason to poo-poo economists because a lot of them are on our side. And the ones that are on our side are able to very much research and defend the economic basis of why the policies that we advocate for work. Now, there is, among those people, I see a lot of pushback still of the leftists who are like, oh, the economy is shit, it's terrible, because they're like, no, let's be reasonable. It's not bad. Like relative to the rest of the world right now, the American economy is doing really good. And even consumer sentiment kind of reflects this. Like, people will respond to polls however they think is correct, but what they really think is usually told with their wallets. And last quarter, we saw a 4.9% rise in consumer spending. We've been seeing consumer spending continue to increase. And that is indicative of something. It is indicative of something. And the thing that I think the economists get wrong is they go, it's indicative that people are lying in the polls. It's indicative that they think that the economy is bad, but their spending indicates otherwise. Because why would they be spending if they actually thought the economy was bad? Which makes sense, right? Traditionally, when people have bad projections of the economy, they save more money. I think that what we're seeing right now is more indicative of what you mentioned, EK, of late stage capitalism. I think that across the board, whether you are a fucking, staunchly red Marxist or you are a, MAGA loving Republican in Alabama, you don't like the fucking status quo. Like, that's the problem. Wealth inequality continues to grow. Wages do not keep up with increases in living costs. And this has been going on for decades. And I think that the pandemic was a breaking point where people saw like how massive scale things could change for a variety of different reasons and went, well, why aren't we changing if we know that everything sucks? And I think what traditional economists are looking at is, according to status quo metrics, we're actually doing pretty well. But I think that most people look at that and go, well, a return to the status quo ain't going to cut it. I look at my life before the pandemic and it was better than it is now, and it still fucking sucked. And I want something better than that. And if you tell me that we are making good progress back to the status quo, that pisses me off because that's not what I want. That's my reading of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys feel the same way, Rory. I see you nodding your head.
So, I mean, going back to your point about younger people just being like anti-economist or it's just funny to me because it's like a lot of them also consider themselves Marxist. They're forgetting that Karl Marx was an economist. like economists are a good thing. There's this YouTube channel, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, called Unlearning Economics.
Yes, he's the best.
He's such a good channel for learning like crash course economics, because economics is just such a broad topic. But he did like an hour-long video on economics 101 and how a lot of people just have like this superficial understanding of economic systems that kind of like leads them into a libertarian pipeline where they basically just adopt these corporate feudalist talking points, and then people see this and they're like, oh, that's what economics is, fuck economics. But then they don't dig deeper. A lot of the socialist policies that we have nowadays, like even social democrat policies, are bred from those Marxist economists. It doesn't just begin and end at Milt Friedman in Iran. And that's what people's minds automatically go to when you say economists. They're thinking like Thomas Sowell types. So it's just a big issue of these far right people kind of completely taking over the concept of economics, and these young leftists seeing that and kind of buying into it and rejecting it, so that when they get in these debates and they try and engage in these topics, they have no real understanding, they have no real engagement. So it kind of just puts a damper on honestly the entire messaging. And economics goes back to all the other social ills that a lot of leftists like talking about. That's why it's socioeconomics. If you don't understand the core of how your system works, how can you possibly try to attack it in any substantive way or make a convincing argument at the very least?
Yeah, it's like it's not about, what am I trying to say? It's like the metrics that continue to get pushed out, like on every single mainstream news institution, like are the same old tired metrics that we don't need to be looking at anymore. Like what TJ said, if we measured what people were spending on, their housing, as opposed to all this other stuff, we would actually get a much better indication of how people are really doing and why people might think that the economy is bad. It's just like the same thing when Ben Shapiro used to go around saying black people look at crime, or black people commit all these crimes, look at these statistics. And it's like, no, dude, poor people commit crimes. Look at these statistics about poor people committing crime. There's virtually no racial disparity. and like all of these things that go along with what makes Black people more likely to be poor people is the reason that you see the number that you're seeing on your statistics, but your statistics are bullshit. They're not the ones that we need to be looking at. It's the same thing with the economy statistics. We have been looking at what rich people like us to look at, and that's what we teach children in schools. I took econ classes in high school. I think I took an econ class in college forever ago, and it wasn't like the whole picture of like what the economy thing. One is just the intro to econ class, so it's a bullshit class anyway. Like, however, it doesn't really give you like it doesn't really arm you with the tools necessary that you need to be able to decipher all of this information that's coming at you. And it also doesn't show you how to like go out and look and do the research and find the metrics that you can actually use to push back against all of this stuff. I think that kind of goes into what you're saying about the leftists that are just like, oh, economics bad. It's like we just haven't really armed the leftists with the tools that they need to go out there and dismantle these arguments, and we get zero pushback from anybody who goes on any sort of news institution and talks about this the state of the economy using these tired old metrics that aren't actually doing the job that they're supposed to do.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree with John's assessment about
it's okay. You're allowed to be wrong about that.
about the I'm sure you'll come around, trust me. About the fact that consumer spending being on the rise is an indicator that the economy is doing better. And certainly I don't agree that it's an indicator that people believe the economy is better, because that doesn't factor in what they're buying. Like people are what are they spending this money on? Like they're buying clothes, they're buying DoorDash, or Baldur's Gate 3. Like that's what they're spending their money on, because they know they are never going to be able to afford to buy a house. They know that they are not going to be able to have a child. Like the stuff that's actually important for the economy. Like they know that's out of reach. So, you spend it on frivolous stuff, because why not? Like saving the money is kind of pointless. So yeah, like technically the spending goes up, but for the lived experience, the human beings who are spending that money, it's kind of empty. And so so they think, okay, all right, I'm spending this cash and everything, but you don't feel good about the economy because there's so many things out of reach that would actually mean something in your life. So yeah, I don't think it is that way. I can easily see how someone would like still feel down about that just because they're spending the cash, because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, TJ, I don't disagree with your disagreement of me, actually. I brought that up because I feel like that is a common way to be like, hey, this is how people actually feel looking at consumer spending. But I would go a step further than you. Like, I agree that as a young person, first of all, if you look at that same survey that I said earlier, one of the biggest splits is that young people in this poll, who I believe are under 25, 93% of them rated the economy unfavorably. It is a terrible economy for people my age. And it's because we're looking at it and we're going, oh shit, I don't know if I'll ever be able to have a house and a kid, and I certainly don't think I'll be able to have both at the same time. Like and that is a massive problem. And I think that, to go a step further from what you said, it's not just that we're buying Baldur's Gate 3. Trust me, I did. But it's that it's a fantastic game. But
definitely not me.
It's that when we go like, oh, people are spending more, it must be an indicator that they have a favorable view of the future. And I think that in this situation, I think that's normally true, but in this situation, it's not, because I think the things people are spending more on things they don't have a choice on. The things that people are complaining about mostly are groceries and rent, and like the housing market and food. We can't not spend our money. Like I can't not pay my rent.
True.
I can't not, and I can downsize, but that's not very liquid. And like I already live in a fucking studio apartment. There's not too much smaller I can get. I can eat out less, but I can't spend much less at the grocery store. I can be frugal, but like there's only so much I can do. And if those prices are increasing, my spending's going to increase whether I view the economy favorably or not. And I think that is the big thing that a lot of these economists are missing when discussing the gap between consumer spending, consumer sentiment, and other indicators in the economy. I love this conversation, and I'm happy to talk economics anytime. Rory, you brought up Unlearning Economics. One of my goals for this channel is to get him on as a guest, because
I would love to be included on that.
Absolutely love everything he does. If you guys are watching this right now, first subscribe to us if you haven't already, and then go subscribe to him, because he'll teach a lot of really good economic lessons to support leftist policy. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this conversation. We might chat a little bit more and release it as a bonus episode. So stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe to The Left Wing. And we look forward to seeing you guys again soon.